This is London, one of the largest and most successful cities on Earth.
Wow. Its story spans 2,000 years of daring invasions, catastrophic fire, heroic ambition, and astonishing technological transformations. From the Romans to the Tudors, from the Vikings to the Victorians.
For years, this was the capital of the world, ruling over an empire of billions. So how did London rise up from an uninhabitable marshland to become the thriving 21st century city we see today?
In this series, we'll reveal the crucial events that changed the very shape and size of London. I'll be digging down into the latest research to uncover conflict, betrayal, and power politics.
I'll be getting special access to some of the city's most extraordinary sites.
And I'll be exploring the innovation and engineering brilliance that gave rise to London's most famous landmarks.
So join us as we go on an amazing journey.
Absolutely brilliant.
To discover exactly how this incredible city was created. Hidden beneath the busy streets of London is the biggest construction site in Europe. Crossrail, the massive new railway being built across the capital. And these miles of newly dug tunnels are offering us something very special, an unexpected window into the history of London.
You can't really see it now because those walls have been concreted over, but up there, about 1.5 meters below ground level, archaeologists discovered 19th century Victorian foundations and sewers.
And as an army of archaeologists moved in, even more layers of the city's past were uncovered.
About 3 meters under the ground, they found a 16th, 17th century burial site, including 3,000 skeletons, some of which belonged to people who died of the Great Plague. 4 meters down, well then, you found artifacts from the time when Westminster Abbey was being built.
Their discoveries took them all the way back to the very birth of London.
Finally, 6 meters below ground level, evidence from the time when this extraordinary city of London was just a small Roman settlement on the banks of the River Thames.
And that's where our story of London starts, in the year 55 BC.
I'm just outside London in the marshes of Essex. Now, 2,000 years ago, this is what the city of London would have looked like. A marshy embankment by the slow-moving River Thames in the southeast corner of a place that ancient explorers used to call the Britannic Islands.
In the 1st century BC, Britain was seen as a wild country, full of mists and rain, inhabited by ferocious warrior tribes ready to defend their land. But that wasn't going to put off the superpower of the time, Rome.
The first Roman to come to Britain was the great general and future emperor Julius Caesar.
In his eyes, any unconquered territory was ripe for the taking, and that meant invasion.
He actually came here twice, first on a fact-finding mission in 55 BC, and again the next year, this time bringing 25,000 soldiers.
But even Caesar, one of Rome's most successful generals, was defeated by this savage island.
Caesar was famous for saying, "I came, I saw, I conquered." But on this occasion, he didn't actually conquer very much. Terrible storms and fierce opposition forced him back across the Channel.
The ancient Britons had won, for now. But 100 years later, in 43 AD, the Romans were back. This time, they meant business. They invaded with an army of 40,000 men and even brought war elephants. Defeat was not an option.
Within just a few years, huge swathes of Britain had fallen to Roman rule.
When those first Romans marched up the River Thames towards present-day London, they immediately realised the potential of this vast tidal river. It provided a spot far inland, deep enough to safely harbour their ships. The Romans settled at the point where the estuary narrowed. And by 47 AD, 4 years after they arrived in Britain, a small town had been established. It was no more than a few wooden buildings spread over a quarter of a mile along the river, on the site of today's financial centre, the City of London.
The River Thames has played a crucial role in the story of London. And one of the first things those original settlers built was a bridge. Today's London Bridge is a major route connecting the south with the north of the capital, and it's built at one of the oldest crossing points over the Thames. 2,000 years ago, the Romans built their bridge right alongside here. There's nothing left of the original structure today, but I want to find out from archaeologist Jane Siddell why they chose to build their bridge here.
They settled on this side and they settled on that side, so that's why they had to have the bridge, and this was the most logical place to build it. It was narrow, it worked for navigation, and it worked for their settlement.
And so the Thames would have been key to the success of that
Absolutely.
Roman settlement.
We often call it the heart of London. It is. London wouldn't have been here without it. You could not have built a Roman city without water transport.
The new bridge was a triumph of Roman engineering. Well, where we're stood right now is pretty much on the line of the bridge, is it?
It doesn't run parallel with modern London Bridge, which is just behind us. It actually runs at an angle, right where we're standing, and then up to the other side of the monument.
I mean, that is enormous.
Absolutely
that was a
huge.
long, long bridge.
You're talking thousands of trees that would have had to be felled to create this.
Incredibly, like Tower Bridge today, the Roman bridge could open up to allow large seagoing ships to pass through.
There'd have been a winch system.
And that would have been manually turned
Yep.
to gradually lift.
Yeah, and the weight would have been enormous.
That was state-of-the-art engineering,
Fantastic
wasn't
site, absolutely fantastic site. And it would have been part of the almost the welcome to London. This is a city that's in your face. We want people to come from around the empire. We want to impress them. We want to say, we are here, this is Britain.
Remarkably, this crossing point chosen by the Romans would be the site of London's only bridge for the next 1,600 years. The building of the bridge marked the moment that the Roman Empire decided to make their new settlement here permanent. They designated the port as an emporium, a place where merchants and businessmen from right across the empire could meet. And they called it Londinium. Over the next 10 years, this busy trading centre boomed. New wharves for ships to dock were built along the riverbank, and the population grew to an estimated 10,000 people, both Romans and native Britons.
But just as Londinium was starting to find its feet, it faced a threat to its very existence. In 60 AD, it was almost wiped off the map. The architect of London's downfall is one of the most famous women in British history. She came from an ancient British tribe, the Iceni.
I remember my father bringing me here and telling me the story of Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni who wreaked revenge on the Romans. And it's a testament to her enduring appeal that here, outside the Houses of Parliament, there is a statue to her, in image of a woman who scared the living daylights out of those in power.
Boudica's reign of terror began after the death of her husband, the king of the Iceni, when the Romans made a grab for his land, ransacking the countryside, flogging Boudica and raping her daughters.
She decided enough was enough. She and her army of 100,000 men launched a vicious attack on the Roman strongholds of Britain, St Albans, Colchester and London, by then a flourishing centre of trade, and burnt them all to the ground. some 70,000 inhabitants were slaughtered.
The fire in London burnt for days, reaching temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
The devastation was total. The evidence of the destruction can be seen in the fact that deep under the modern city is a thick layer of charred earth, up to ½ a metre deep.
Rome's glorious new trading centre lay in ruins. More than 10 years of work had been reduced to ashes. If London was to survive Boudica's onslaught, it needed help.
Would Rome rescue Londinium? The future of the city hung in the balance.
London, 60 AD, was a burnt-out ruin, brought to its knees by the British Queen, Boudica. But the Romans fought back. This new trade hub on the Thames was too valuable to lose. They sent in troops to defend the city and set about creating a new Londinium from scratch. But how quickly could the city recover from such a devastating blow?
I'm in the heart of the city. Just around the corner is the Bank of England. And here in 2013, archaeologists made a major discovery that revealed extraordinary new evidence about what was happening in Londinium after Boudica's revolt. They were working on a huge 4-year excavation, exploring the land just over there. And what they found was incredible. Preserved in the thick, damp mud were some of the most important artifacts ever to be found from early Roman London.
Ancient messages scratched onto wood. Incredibly, they found over 400 of these writing tablets, common in Roman times, but up until now, only a precious few were thought to have survived.
L.A.
The wood was covered in beeswax, and the Romans wrote on it with a stylus.
They would cut right through and they'd cut into the wood, and what we're reading are the scratches they left behind.
Historian Dr. Roger Tomlin has been studying these fragments of writing.
Presumably these are some of the earliest handwritten documents for Britain that we have.
Yes, they are arguably the earliest.
There's even the first ever reference to London, an address. And one of them, dated 80 AD, gives us clues to what was happening just 20 years after Boudica's revolt.
This tablet, it's addressed to someone called Tertius, and then he's described as a Braceario. He's a Brachiarius, so he's either a maltster or a corn chandler or a brewer. And I think personally he's a brewer.
So that means that business and trade has been set up again, brewing is happening in London, and that we absolutely have evidence of it being sold.
Yes.
But what's really amazing is just how quickly the city got back on its feet after the revolt in 60 AD.
We have another tablet which is dated, I think, the 21st of October, 62, which two businessmen contract to deliver 20 loads of foodstuffs from Verulamium to London.
So it's up and running again within a few years?
Within perhaps 1 year, 2 years, yes. London can take it.
That's amazing. Londinium bounced back and became not just a centre of trade, but of politics, law and finance as well. But in just decades after the first Roman soldiers and merchants arrived, this trading emporium had become the capital of the Roman province of Britannia. This city was going places.
Roman London now embarked on a major period of regrowth. It reached its height in the early 2nd century, with buildings covering the area of today's City of London.
Londinium was no poor relative of Rome. Here in the heart of the City of London, you would have seen large stone-built public buildings just like those you'd have found in any other great Roman capital.
In 120 AD, the city's leaders completed a set of massive government buildings on the site of the present-day Leadenhall Market.
Where I'm standing now was once right in the middle of the biggest building in Londinium, the Roman Basilica and Forum, joined together in one vast network. The Basilica was like a town hall with law courts. The Forum contained shops, offices, and a large open-air marketplace.
The whole complex took 30 years to build and was the largest construction outside of northern Italy. Its footprint was more than twice the size of today's St. Paul's Cathedral. I've been told you can see some remains of this amazing monument if you know where to look. Apparently, I need to explore deep down below modern London, in the most unusual of places, underneath this barber's shop.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. It's the first time I've been into any hairdresser, I think, and seen something 2,000 years old. That's all that remains of one of the basilica's original arches. But when you look at it, it makes you wonder just how many more treasures of Londinium are hidden underground.
Archaeologists have been hard at work throughout modern London's building boom to unearth whatever remains they can before new foundations hide them forever. And that's led to a major discovery, a truly iconic Roman building.
There's one place that says ancient Rome like nowhere else. A place where the blood of humans and animals was spilt for entertainment. The Romans loved horrific spectacle, and in Londinium, it all happened here, the amphitheater.
Yes, London had its very own amphitheater, and its foundations lie under the present-day Guildhall. It was built in stone at the start of the 2nd century, right in the heart of the ancient city.
This curved line here traces its outline, giving us just a glimpse of its size. 7,000 Londoners at a time would come here to watch executions, animal fights, and gladiatorial combat. Having an amphitheater like this really mattered. It showed the world that Londinium was an important Roman city.
It's amazing to think of all those Roman Londoners at work and at play in this grand new city, only 70 years after the first Roman soldiers arrived. Londinium, with all its grand new buildings, was now the place to be. And I'm in search of evidence of the city's growing wealth. In modern-day Billingsgate.
Beneath one of these office blocks lies some incredible archaeological remains that are usually kept under lock and key.
But I've been allowed in to explore the ruins of a large Roman villa built in 190 AD.
Wow.
There we are.
With the archaeologist, Dr. Miles Russell.
This is pretty amazing. What are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at what's left of a Roman townhouse. So it's a big sort of luxuriant Mediterranean-style house. Unfortunately, the floor levels have gone. They've collapsed down into the underfloor heating system. So what we're seeing here, all these channels, would be conveying heat under the floor levels.
Underfloor heating. So this is a really fancy house.
It is, absolutely. I mean, it's terraced into the side of the hill, and it's a sort of a riverside apartment. It's got this great view of the Thames. There's a lot of wealth coming into the city, and all these wealthy individuals are spending their money. They are creating their sort of home from Rome, a lovely, luxurious villa-style apartment. The key thing about this structure is what's over here, which is part of their own sort of private bathhouse.
So do you get down here very often?
No, this is not a space where normally you can get access to. The key really is you can see that little arch there. That's part of a stoke hole.
A stoke hole?
You're shoveling or wholesale burning material in through that hole, creating heat like a furnace.
How would this have differed from the public baths, down the road in the city?
They don't have plugs or drains, so the water's only going to be emptied by slaves or servants with buckets on a semi-irregular basis. So if you're swimming in that, you'll be going through like a human soup of skin and hair and unpleasantness. Here, this is your bathhouse, your environment, and you can stay here as long as you like. It's your own controlled environment, and that's what really counts. As the house owner, you're inviting guests in, you're doing business with them, you're striking deals. This is where you're impressing your guests.
It's wonderful to imagine those ancient Romans wheeling and dealing as they relaxed in their exclusive bathhouse. And for another 100 years, more and more people would flock to do business here.
At the dawn of the 3rd century, Londinium had become a crowded city, with a population that had risen to an estimated 30,000. But where did all these people come from?
If you spend the summer's afternoon in central London these days, you'll find it to be a diverse, multicultural city. Perhaps it might surprise you to learn that Roman London wasn't that different. It was a cosmopolitan town filled with people from many different ethnic backgrounds.
And to find out the origin of one of these inhabitants of Roman London, I've come to the Museum of London's storeroom. Here, hidden away inside these cardboard boxes, are the skeletons of more than 500 Roman Londoners. Using the very latest forensic techniques, bone specialist Dr. Rebecca Redfern has made some intriguing discoveries.
Your skeleton records lots of information about where you've lived, what kind of lifestyle you had. So by looking at the bones and teeth, we can figure out what they ate and where they might have come from.
One of the best preserved skeletons in the museum's collection is the 3rd century Lant Street teenager, named after the street in which it was found in 1989.
What do we know about this skeleton?
We know that she's female, but she's 14 years old, and she's from the southern Mediterranean. We know that there are a lot of child migrants in London. There's an 8-year-old child that we found who's travelled all the way from Germany, but she's actually travelled even further.
Evidence from chemicals in her bones indicates she'd arrived here from a different continent entirely.
She's come from possibly North Africa.
Wow. Do you have any theories about who she might have been?
We still think of her as being a child, but in the Roman world, girls often got married at 10 and 12, and so by 14 she may have been married to a soldier. She may have been a slave as well.
Rebecca's research shows that immigrants like the Lant Street teenager were just the tip of the iceberg. Thousands of people would have been transported, either willingly or by force, into London from all corners of the vast Roman Empire.
London becomes this melting pot where people create new communities, and although it's very diverse, they're creating recognisable identities that reflect the multicultural empire.
Londinium had been on an amazing journey in its first 200 years. It had gone from a muddy wasteland to a thriving town, only to be burnt down. But it rose again from the ashes to become a stronger and bigger city, built on a grand scale with massive buildings. But change was coming. The Roman Empire wouldn't last forever. As its enemies grew stronger, London came under threat.
Londinium, 200 AD, a rich city and the capital of Roman Britain. It had come a long way from its boggy beginnings.
What was once a military outpost was now a prosperous port, a flourishing centre of commerce, and the centre of administration for the Roman province of Britannia.
Rome was keen to bolster this key city in the northernmost reaches of its empire. That meant Londinium's biggest and most ambitious building project yet, a city wall. And amazingly, large chunks of this ancient structure are still standing. Now this map shows us where all those remains are, all these red dots. And you can see how it would have enclosed this area in the middle. And it's remarkable how that's been left in place and incorporated into the modern city. Now, I've been told that the most impressive remains are here at Tower Hill, which is why I've come to find out a bit more.
I've arranged to meet archaeologist and historian Dr. Simon Elliott, who spent years unlocking the wall's secrets.
Now, Simon, I hope you don't mind me saying, but it doesn't strike me as the most impressive Roman structure that I've ever seen.
Well, the first thing to remember is this was the first city wall of this size actually built in the province of Britannia. So for the people living here, it really, really was impressive.
So what size are we talking about? What are the dimensions of the wall here?
Well, it was 6 metres tall when it was built by the Romans, and it was capped with red sandstone, so it would look brilliant from a distance. It would look really, really striking.
And what about the other dimensions? How thick is it?
It's 3 metres wide.
3 metres is an incredible thickness.
Well, it's a very stable wall. I mean, you've got the outer facing here, this is the outer facing. You've got the inner facing, both equally magnificent when built, and then in the middle you've got a rubble core.
This here is outer facing that you can see, is it?
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
Is this original outer facing? This
is original Roman outer facing.
These stones were placed here by the Romans, by Roman hands.
By the Romans.
2,000 years ago.
Absolutely.
London's wall had a lasting impact on the city. It gave it a clearly defined shape. One that remained right into the Middle Ages. And it marked out what's now known as the Square Mile, today's City of London. But there's a mystery. London is built on clay. So where could such huge quantities of stone have been quarried? It took Simon years of detective work, investigating all the abandoned quarries downriver from London. Now he thinks he's found the answer. And it lies 60 miles away in a quiet village in rural Kent.
This is someone's back garden, Simon. How come your research brought you here?
Well, in actual fact, you're not looking at someone's back garden. You're looking at the largest man-made hole in Roman Britain and possibly in northwestern Roman Europe. Everything all the way along the sides up there, etc.
What looks like a quiet green valley today, in fact, played a vital part in the creation of Londinium.
The majority of stone which built Roman London came from where you're standing right now.
That's really good to know. That puts a really big smile on my face.
Going deeper into the woods, we search out the clues that prove to Simon that this was actually a giant Roman quarry.
There's one of the quarry faces there, look. You can see it right there, right in front of you.
So that is...
That vertical bit is a quarry step.
That's the rock face?
That's the rock face. So that is the actual rock face that the Romans would have worked on. So here, what you can see are pieces of stone physically extracted by the quarry workers.
And Simon's found more proof in the distinctive shape and size of these rocks. They're exactly what he'd expect to find in a Roman quarry.
All of these big stones would have been Roman quarried out and just left here.
This is ready-to-use stone. This is the Roman equivalent of sort of an IKEA flat-pack piece of furniture. This would be broken down into smaller pieces and then turned into masonry. So this is the effect of 1,800 years' worth of weathering and wear in an abandoned quarry.
Just 5 miles away, at a modern quarry, workers are still digging out the very same seam of stone that the Romans used.
This is fantastic.
The big difference in the Roman period was there'd clearly be no automation whatsoever. So the place will be swarming with thousands and thousands of workers.
These workers had to dig out by hand the 86,000 tons of stone needed to build Londinium's wall. And it took nearly 2,000 boat journeys to transport all that stone back to the city, along the Thames.
Who were these people who were doing this backbreaking work, these unskilled labourers?
If you were working in a Roman metalla, so a Roman mine or a quarry, you could be slaves, you could be captives from the Roman walls. One punishment was to be condemned to work in the metalla, and follow that through, condemned to work in the metalla to death. You can see this very fine section near Tower Hill Tube Station and you can look at it, but what you often forget is the human story about the people who gave their lives for that stone to be quarried.
But not voluntarily giving their lives.
No.
There was absolutely never going to be any benefit for them in the work that they were doing.
Absolutely not at all.
It was all for the the glory and the power
Of
of
Rome.
the Roman Empire. This is a truly impressive place. But what I really struggle to comprehend is the position of those slaves and prisoners who are tirelessly put to work here under the ever-watchful eye of their Roman captors, who ultimately gave their lives over to the building of a spectacular capital, a capital they'd never get to see.
Londinium's wall, finally completed in 280 AD, was built to impress. But the Roman Empire was becoming overstretched and divided. Its barbarian enemies were gaining strength. During the next century, Londinium became increasingly neglected and vulnerable to invasion.
The Romans had occupied Londinium for almost 400 years, but now much of the army had been redeployed abroad, and in 410, the Roman military gave up on this far-flung outpost of the empire. They packed up and left.
Civilians followed the army and deserted in droves. By the end of the 5th century, the city was an empty ruin, which was left to rot for another 100 years.
2 centuries after the Romans had left, London was a ghost town. But even if London was a bit down at heel, it still boasted this prime location next to the Thames. And by the 7th century AD, a new set of invaders has arrived to take full advantage. Saxon raiders. By 670, these Germanic warriors had swept through southern England. Now they sailed up the Thames, hungry for new territory. And they discovered the same sweet spot on this deep tidal river which had attracted the Romans. But the Saxons settled about a mile west of the ruins of the deserted Roman city in what is now Covent Garden.
Covent Garden today is a buzzing market full of weird and wonderful things to buy. It's used in much the same way as it was in Saxon times. Archaeologists digging under the ground have found shards of pottery and broken glass dating back 1400 years, which suggests that as early as the 7th century, this was a trading centre. The Saxons called it London Wich, which literally means London's marketplace.
And it couldn't have been more different from Roman London. With a population of around 7,000, it was only a quarter of the size, and just a small collection of simple wooden houses. A far cry from the stone buildings and paved streets of the old Roman city. But it was sited by the River Thames, and for the next 100 years, trade blossomed.
London Wich was a prosperous and wealthy spot, and it soon attracted the attentions of another Northern European people. We call them the Vikings.
Once again, the horrors of war and invasion loomed. Saxon London was squaring up for 100 years of bloodshed that would change the city forever. Britain, 850 AD. And London was about to meet its fiercest warriors yet. The Vikings were coming. These ruthless raiders from Scandinavia had rampaged through northern Europe, leaving death and destruction in their wake. The small, undefended town of Saxon London Wich was ripe for the taking.
In 851, a raiding party of 350 Viking ships sailed right up the Thames and plundered London Wich. Pre-warned, many of the citizens had fled, but those who remained were killed, and their houses and shops were burnt to the ground. If the city was to survive, it would need radical action.
The hero of the resistance movement against the Vikings was a man whose name is now legendary in British history, King Alfred. In 886, he expelled a Viking band that was occupying London, which then he set about reorganising the city's defences.
London, which wasn't the capital of Saxon England, the king had appointed Winchester for that honour. But its strategic location on the Thames was so valuable that there was little doubt the Vikings would be back. Alfred needed a bold plan. He found it in the neglected ruins of Londinium. Its Roman walls would provide protection. So Alfred moved the whole Saxon settlement inside the old city. And as he started to build, London was reborn.
As I walk along this street, Cheapside, I'm actually following directly in the footsteps of King Alfred. This road goes from Aldgate in the east to Ludgate just up ahead. And in the 9th century, it was one of the newly designed streets of a place the Saxons called London Burh.
London Burh covered the same area as Old Londinium, but with fewer than 10,000 people, it had only a third of the population of the former Roman town. Meanwhile, the old Saxon settlement of Londonwich was abandoned and renamed Aldwych, or the Old Town. A name that survives today. In the new London Burh, Alfred repaired the old Roman stone wall.
But if anyone thought that was enough to keep the Vikings at bay for good, well, they were wrong. At the start of the 11th century, just 100 years after Alfred's death, they were back. And this time, the battles over London were fiercer than ever.
For the next 50 years, control of London swung between the Saxons and the Vikings. And I'm on the trail of one of the fiercest battles for the city, with historian Dr. Thomas Williams. It took place on the River Thames in 1014. The Saxon king Ethelred was determined to reclaim London from the Vikings. But the Vikings controlled its bridge, key for the city's defence.
The London Bridge itself was fortified. It would have been a timber construction, probably with battlements of some sort and towers, very strongly defended.
But Ethelred launched a daring attack.
Sending his men up the river with grappling hooks and ropes, tying them around the pillars of the bridge, all the while under attack from spears being thrown down and arrow fire, went back down river and dragged these pillars out and sent the bridge crashing into the water.
The Vikings were defeated and fled. But London still wasn't safe. Just across the channel, another group of fearsome warriors was gathering strength.
They were called the Normans, and the lands they settled in northwest France are what we still call Normandy. Now, their leader was known as Duke William the Bastard, and he was taking a special interest in England. In fact, he thought he was its rightful king. In 1066, he assembled a large army and invaded.
It was the biggest military force Britain had seen since the Romans 1,000 years before. William defeated the Saxon king Harold at the Battle of Hastings. And with Harold dead, he headed straight for London. On Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned king in Westminster Abbey.
William soon discovered that invading England was the easy part of conquest. Securing it would be much more difficult. So he ordered the construction of heavily guarded castles up and down the country. The most impressive of them all was here, the Tower of London.
William's imposing fortress, the White Tower, still stands today. His original square keep has been added to by a succession of monarchs to create one of the most famous and recognisable castles in the world.
cream-coloured stone William used was imported from his home region of Normandy, and it was chosen because it gleamed when the sunlight hit it, making it visible for miles around.
And then there were the defences, ramparts more than 4 metres thick at the base and soaring almost 30 metres into the sky. William brought in stonemasons from Normandy to construct his tower. They made a statement fortress fit for a king.
The whole project took 20 years to complete, and when it was finished, it was an unmistakable statement of Norman power right on London's doorstep.
William died before he could see his tower completed, but he left behind an extraordinary monument to power and oppression. Its most famous features, the onion-shaped domes, were added during the reign of Henry VIII. But the original fortress was so impressive, it would have scared the native Londoners into submission.
The finished building completely dominated the city of London beside it. This was the tallest building that Londoners had ever seen, like an 11th century shard, only garrisoned with foreign soldiers.
William's new fortress became the stronghold for a dynasty of Norman kings which would last almost a century. Life under Norman rule brought stability and meant Londoners could get back to what they were good at: trade. The city grew behind its walls, and by 1250, the population had risen to nearly 80,000, surpassing the levels of its Roman heyday. And once again, it became the undisputed capital of England, replacing Winchester. London was set on course for a bright future.
But in the next chapter of the city's extraordinary story, the population is struck down by a deadly disease.
The Tudors take over and construct the greatest buildings Europe has ever seen.
The population explodes, and Elizabethan adventurers put London at the centre of a growing new empire.